So here's the problem. Well, I won't call it a problem. Here's the challenge. It's strengthening those people performance links. And I mentioned social responsibility because that's really front and center now for many organizations, and I'll come back and talk about this. Well-being and performance. And to recognize that the three are part of the same chain. And that chain is, when you strengthen it, is really what can lead to sustainable success. Humanly sustainable. And I know sustainability, like this, is the word everybody's using now. So I'm criticizing myself for picking up a buzzword, but actually I'm trying to talk about the human sustainability of organizations. You cannot achieve your business growth targets for the next 5 years if you burn out your employees. That's the human sustainability piece. So these are the building blocks, and when you came in, you may have got a little bookmark about my book that came out just a year ago, exactly a year ago, called Creating Healthy Organizations. And the book is looking at these 4 building blocks. And how I got to these building blocks was actually kind of sifting through the evidence from all of those bubbles that I showed you earlier, plus filtering it through my own experience as a consultant and seeing how organizations that are kind of moving, that have set themselves this big vision of being healthier, both in people and performance terms, how they've moved forward. And it, for me, all came down to 4 key building blocks. The first is a positive culture. And many of the things that you've already heard, let's take respect. It's often embedded in organizational value statements. Okay? And so the values that I'm sure exist in some way or another in each of your organizations can be a very important building block if you are able to help people translate those values into not just day-to-day behavior, not just hour-to-hour behavior, but minute-to-minute behavior in every encounter. And guess what? The organizations that are widely recognized and validated through research as being great workplaces and really high-performing in terms of what happens with their share prices and what investors think of them and so on, they're organizations that have really been able to translate their values into behaviors that everybody owns. And I have a couple of examples that I use in the book of why positive. Well, I talk about positive and negative cultures, and the negative is really the sort of the truly toxic workplace. And there are some very extreme examples if we move to that end of the continuum of a culture. And one of the examples that I use is the Challenger space shuttle disaster. And the NASA inquiry into that disaster, where the capsule basically burned up as it entered the atmosphere, and people could see pictures of these little tiles coming off. And anyway, the NASA inquiry concluded it wasn't the tiles. It was what it referred to in their report as a failed safety culture that had to do with the nature of working relationships, especially among the engineers who were designing that spacecraft. It had to do with culture. On the positive side, it is so simple. And here I'd refer you to, one of the leading, probably the leading luxury hotel and resort chain in the world. It happens to be based in Canada, in Toronto. It's the Four Seasons. And Isidore Sharp, who founded the Four Seasons back in the 60s, has actually written a book, and he calls it the Four Seasons Story, but and the subtitle is it's the story of a philosophy. And he talks about how back in the 60s, when he was building the first Four Seasons in an actually really seedy area of downtown Toronto, he said, how can I how can I really succeed in doing this, and how can I ensure that the construction quality is better than anybody else's? And within 30 seconds, he realized, well, it's actually pretty simple. None of the other contractors in the city have any respect whatsoever for the skilled trades. They treat them like garbage. So if I treat these people the way I want to be treated, they're going to work better for me. And guess what? That's the philosophy. It's the golden rule, essentially. And he operates around the world. He said that this is translatable into virtually every major religion, every culture. Basically, if you treat people well, they will treat others well. If you treat your employees well, they'll treat your guests well. Simple. That's the philosophy. That's a positive culture. So let's move on to the next building block. And I call this inclusive leadership. And somebody came up to me in the break and said, this is great, this is an exciting event, and I've just been, I'm on a wellness committee. And there's sort of a lot on my shoulders. Basically, that was the message. Well, my message in return is this has to be an undertaking that involves everybody in the organization, or as many people as possible. So to use an example, I know that healthcare is often seen as an unhealthy work environment, paradoxically, but there are some very healthy hospitals, and there's one in particular, Trillium Health Centre in Mississauga, Ontario, that I know about, and I've had the pleasure of working with them, and they have this motto, and it's called 1,001 Leaders. And basically, the signal here is that everybody in the organization has really encouragement and a responsibility to make their work environment and their team better, and to improve the quality of patient safety, safety and care, improve the overall quality of care. So the idea of 1,001 leaders has been is part of their culture. It's been communicated at every opportunity, and people are change agents. They come up with suggestions. They're listened to. Again, this goes back to some of the points that were made earlier about this is a very psychologically healthy workplace, and their surveys show that. The vibrant workplace, and I'll get to the vibrant workplace momentarily. You can see I'm sort of playing with language here, and I'm trying to kind of nudge people just that one step forward. And here, the language of vibrant is saying, how do we get beyond just talking about a healthy workplace? The problem, I think, talking about healthy workplaces is it does not resonate at the executive level. I mean, it's getting certainly way more attention than when I did my last talk in this room. Absolutely. But it still hasn't quite kind of caught on. So what I talk about is a workplace that, if you look at the list of characteristics I'm going to show you in a few minutes, it's a list that defines a high-performing workplace. So it basically is almost, well, it is identical. And so you could talk about the ingredients of this workplace and never once use the word health, knowing full well that every ingredient in that workplace has everything to do about health. But when you're having that vital conversation with your CEO, you talk about a workplace that's a high-performance workplace. That's what you talk about. And if you've got those three building blocks in place, then you have the basis for employees who are beyond engaged. How many of you have in your organization high levels of employee engagement as a goal in your strategy? Put your hands up. How many do engagement surveys? Okay, so this is a pretty common goal, pretty common practice. Well, why inspired? Here's why. Here's why I've chosen that particular term. It takes us that step beyond engagement. And I found it fascinating. When I was doing, I've done workshops across the country, and often with managers. And ask just managers. And I'll ask managers to describe for them the ideal employee. What is your vision of the ideal employee? And of course, this is all a prelude to getting them to talk about, well, what kind of a workplace do you need to design to support that ideal employee? But anyway, So we have these discussions, and they get the flip charts out, and we kind of capture what they're saying. And what they're telling me and each other is that they want people who are more than engaged. Basically, engagement breaks down to people who are satisfied, committed, and willing to put in some extra effort. But when you listen to what managers want, they want people to be creative. They want people to be passionate. They want people to own their jobs. These are the terms they're using, right? This is way beyond engagement. Hence, my kind of tweak of the label, calling it inspired employees. So this is the model. And it's really a kind of a positive upward spiral. Because the more you get these conditions in place, the more that people do feel really inspired about the work they do, they want to come into work, and the more that the organization is going to have the human capabilities to succeed in the future.